Jaylen Brown has a new home. He is being traded to the Philadelphia 76ers.
So the Celtics just traded a guy that they took with the number 3 pick in the draft, who's been here 10 years, who's MVP of the NBA Finals, wingman to Jayson Tatum, if not his equal, pretty damn close. And they traded him to the Philadelphia 76ers for a 36-year-old guy who looks like he's getting near the end. There was a little bit of a resurgence there in the postseason, but a guy who's been a failure pretty much everywhere he's gone since he left Indiana. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it with a freaking passion. And the Celtics now today are worse than they were yesterday.
Tatum doesn't want him here, period. He's done with him, and they don't have the balls to trade Tatum and get rid of Missoula, so Brown had to go, and this is what they came up with.
That was a theory. That night it was everybody's theory. Tatum wanted him gone, the front office folded, and Paul George is what's left over. Except Boston gave a reason, a real one, on the record 5 days later, and it had nothing to do with Jayson Tatum.
The path looked a little bit more challenging with 70% of our cap and such a high percent of our usage tied into 2 players.
70% of the cap tied up in 2 players. That's it. That's the reason. And it's in every single article written about this trade. It's why most people think they understand what happened here. Almost nobody stayed for the follow-up question.
I know there are salary matching rules, but you talk about how you can't have 70% of the salary cap tied up into these 2 players.
Still do.
You still do.
That's right.
So
good follow-up.
Paul George makes $54 million. Jayson Tatum makes $58.5 out of a $165 million cap. Run it, that's 68% of Boston's money sitting on 2 players. 70 went to 68. 2 points. That is what a finals MVP bought. And when a reporter said it out loud 6 feet from his face, Brad Stevens didn't argue for a single second. He said good follow-up. You want to know what Boston actually cleared for 10 years of Jaylen Brown?
The Celtics saved $3 million on this trade. Jaylen Brown makes 58, Paul George makes 54.
Okay,
I'm sorry, 57 for Jaylen Brown, 54 for Paul George.
$3 million. And nobody is talking about that. For 2 weeks, the argument has been about what Boston got back. 2 first-round picks and a 36-year-old for a finals MVP. That argument is fair, but it's also the wrong one. Boston told you the problem was 2 players eating up 70% of the cap. They traded one of the 2 players, it's still 2 players, and it's still almost 70%. So that was never the problem. So one of the 2 things is true. Either Brad Stevens made the biggest trade of his career, staked it on a number, and got the math wrong, or the number was never what this was about. And I sat through all 40 minutes of that press conference. He didn't get the math wrong, which means the real reason is the one nobody in the building is willing to say into a microphone. Boston didn't trade Jaylen Brown over money. They traded him because they decided 4 years ago this dual's ceiling was an isolated flash in the pan, rather than a sustainable dynasty. Yes, they caught lightning in a bottle and won it all in 2024, but the front office treated that championship as a stay of execution rather than a proof of concept. They tried twice to break the pairing up when the cracks showed, failed twice, and on the third try, with the relationship completely imploded and their average cratering, they fractionally took whatever was left on the table. The 70%, the aprons, the CBA, all of it is true, and all of it is the vocabulary a front office reaches for when the real sentence is, we don't think these 2 are good enough. So this is either the most honest thing this franchise has ever done in a decade, or the day the Boston Celtics quietly gave up on the best thing they ever built. Here's how you can tell which one it is. Because there's also a third theory, and it's probably the one you brought with you. Boston's season ended in the first round against Philadelphia. They went up 3-1, and they lost the series in 7.
It's had to be this way. Game 7. 76ers.
That's the kind of loss that gets people fired. So when Brown got shipped to the same Philadelphia team 10 weeks later, half of Boston did the math for themselves. He choked, they blamed him, and they sent him to the team that beat him. Except Brown never hid from it. On his own stream, unprompted, nobody asking, he had this to say.
Blew a 3-1 lead. Understand, I could take accountability for that. That's fine.
And look at the season wrapped around that series. Jayson Tatum tore his Achilles in the 2025 playoffs and missed nearly the entire year. Brown didn't have a co-star. He had a rehab timeline, and he answered with the best numbers of his life, and 56 wins. You don't carry that guy over one series, not the guy who just carried you without your franchise player. You trade him because a number he said 5 days later, and it isn't 70. Start with the part Boston isn't lying about, because it's true.
47% of the cap is what those 2 guys were when we won it all, right? And that's just going up, and that's tough.
47%. That's what Tatum and Brown cost when Boston won the title in 2024. By last season, it was 70. Same 2 players, nothing about either of them changed, and the only thing that moved was the price. both extensions kicked in and Boston became the only team in the league carrying 2 Supermax deals at once. So what did the other 23% buy? 3 names: Al Horford, Drew Holiday, and Kristaps Porzingis. A championship-level defensive guard, a 7-footer who shot threes and pulled defenses apart, and a veteran big who'd seen everything the sport can do to a man. That wasn't depth, that was a team that won. And within 12 months of the parade, all of it was gone. Holiday traded, Porzingis traded, Hartford and Luke Cornett allowed to walk, every move to duck a line. The timing made it worse. League revenue came in under projection, so the cap rose 6.7% instead of the 10% teams had been budgeting for. Boston had less room than they planned for, and Steven knows exactly what the rules did to him. He wrote the fix himself, out loud, at his own press conference.
We may not be sitting here if there was a rule in the CBA that said the guys that you drafted that you signed to 35% Supermaxes count as 25% of the cap.
All of that is real, every word of it. It's also not why Jaylen Brown is a 76er, because if it were, 70% would be 68 now. It isn't, it's 70. If you're into the stuff underneath the headline instead of the headline itself, hit subscribe, it's free, and it's the only thing that helps a channel this size. The part that actually explains it starts long before any of this. Go back to summer of 2022. Kevin Durant asked Brooklyn for a trade, and Boston, 2 years before Tatum and Brown would win a championship together, offered Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and a first-round pick to go get him. The Nets said no. Think about what that means. The front office had both of these guys in their primes, and the first time a bigger name became available, they put Brown on the table, before the banner, before the Finals MVP. Then this June they did it again. Brown plus 2 unprotected first-round picks to Milwaukee for Giannis. And this one was close. Reporting says the Bucks were leaning towards Boston's offer right up until they took Miami's instead. Twice in 4 years, Boston tried to trade Jaylen Brown for a bigger star. Twice it fell through. And through every bit of it, Brown never asked out. Not once. He heard his name in trade rumors for 4 years and never requested a trade.
I know it's going to happen. That's just the world we live in. But at least now, because I have an obligation, like it's my job to speak to the media. Like it's in my contract. If I don't speak to the media, I will be fine.
And this is where it stops being about money at all. It's a piece of the story almost nobody has written. Chad Finn at the Globe noticed it, buried it in a column, and the rest of the basketball world walked right past it. Tatum and Brown never actually played with each other, they played near each other. 2 enormous talents taking turns operating in parallel, never combining into one thing. Which is remarkable because it worked anyway. They averaged 20 a night in the same season 6 separate times. Per ESPN research, that's the second most any duo in NBA history behind only Jerry West and Elgin Baylor. So how does a duo that doesn't fit win a championship? You buy the scene. You go get a very specific kind of player. Selfless, well-rounded, high-end, and willing to do the connecting work neither star does. Holiday, Horford, Derek White, those men were the glue. Which is why the 47% matters, and it's got nothing to do with accounting. 53% of the cap bought the only thing that made this duo function. Boston sold it to pay the stars, and this summer Stevens went out to buy it back, and told the room what he found. Nobody's selling the guy anymore. So Steven explains the whole decision in one sentence, without ever saying it.
Thought our path to getting what we ultimately wanted to do, we probably looked more like the last couple of years. I think we could come back and be really good. But I chose still being good with more optionality.
There it is, still being good. His words. He looked at Tatum and Brown, a duo that won a championship, and called the ceiling still being good. That's not a man solving a cap problem, that's a man who decided in 2022 and finally stopped waiting. So what did Boston get for 4 years of conviction? Paul George, 2 first-rounders in 2028 and 2031, and 2 seconds. Stevens never pretended George was as good.
We're not very far removed from all sitting in our series against Philadelphia and watching Paul be a guy that could carry you for portions of a quarter or a half, but also play a complementary role on both ends of the floor at the highest of levels.
Paul George helped beat the Celtics in that first-round series in April. In July, they traded for him. He's a 9-time All-Star, a 6-time All-NBA player, and the Globe described him as having more injury scars than an inept pirate. He's played more than 60 games once since 2019, and last season he only played 37, missing 25 of them for failing a drug test. Around the league, the deal has spent years getting called the worst contract in the NBA. So how does a Finals MVP end up costing that? Boston did it to themselves. Once Stevens made Brown the centerpiece of the Giannis pursuit, everybody knew he was available. Shams reported Boston was asking for 4 first-round picks as a starting point, and the league laughed at it. Denver called, Charlotte called, New Orleans, Brooklyn, Atlanta, Golden State, the Clippers. Stephen told nearly all of them they didn't have the assets, and every rejection taught the league something. The moment teams understood how badly Boston wanted this done, there was no reason to hurry. They could just wait for the price to fall. And it fell all the way down to Philadelphia. Bobby Marks, who spent years as an actual NBA assistant GM and now explains cap sheets for ESPN, put the ending on it. Brian Windhorst asked him whether Philadelphia essentially got Jaylen Brown for free. Mark said essentially yes, because the market for Paul George was so bad that Philadelphia would have needed to attach an unprotected first just so anybody could take him off their hands. Philadelphia was going to have to pay a team to absorb Paul George. Instead, Boston absorbed him and handed over a Finals MVP to do it. Then Boston spent the room they'd cleared. Mitchell Robinson, one of the best rim protectors and offensive rebounders alive, Mike Conley, a former All-Star point guard and one of the most respected veterans in the league, to steady the bench, and an extension for their young center, Neemias Queta. Then they stopped because they're hard-capped, bleeding cash, and desperate to stay under the tax. The only card they have left to play is a trade exception that expires in February. That's the optionality. 2 picks, an expiring contract, and a phone call they might make in the winter. Now here's where I need you to stop, because there's a reading on this that's darker than anything Steven said, and the evidence isn't thin. It goes like this. Boston isn't a basketball team anymore. It's a spreadsheet that happens to own one. Start with late June. While Brown was still a Celtic, Bobby Marks went on Sirius XM NBA radio and repeated something an analytics person had told him. Quote, "I had an analytics guy tell me, we view Jaylen Brown as the 7th best player on the team." End quote. Let me repeat that. The 7th best player on the team. About a Finals MVP who finished 6th in MVP voting that year. Brown answered publicly and asked the only question that matters. Quote, "Analytics nowadays used to discredit and control narratives. Roll the ball out, none of these guys better than me on both ends. Who does he work for?" End quote. Brian Windhorst answered it without meaning to. Bill Chisholm bought the Celtics for a record $6 billion, and he funded it with a complex layering of private equity firms putting institutional money in. Several NBA teams had private equity investors. Windhorst reads that Boston sits at the top of that pyramid. Then an Eastern Conference executive said the quiet part. Quote, "Let me tell you, they did not become less analytical after that. Private equity wants the answers to the tests." End quote. That's an NBA executive weeks after the trade, talking to one of the best connected reporters in the sport. Now go back to the day it happened, because a Boston native in his car had already figured it out.
In a car. Go ahead, Nick.
This is a private equity guy being a private equity guy. He's just stripping down the team. All he's doing is making this team as profitable for himself, and hopefully he'll flip it in 5 years.
The reporting by 3 weeks. The other side is fair, though. Marks himself walked it back. He said he's an eye test guy, that the 7th best player line was a stretch, and that Brown finished 6th in MVP voting, carrying a team to the 2 seed. What he confirmed is that there's a spirited debate inside of front offices. A debate, not a verdict. And the owner stood at the podium and denied all of it.
No, absolutely not. The mandate is to win, and Brad and his team came with a recommendation. This is the way we're gonna win.
And there's the man himself, who did not behave like a spreadsheet for 1 second of that press conference.
If I was being honest, if that exact deal came from a team out west and you were comparing the two, then you probably take the team out west. But that's not the way it was working. I'll sleep over the fan part of this. Yeah. I get it. Like, there's a bunch of 7 jerseys around. I'm pretty sure I bought a couple. Somebody asked me earlier today, do you miss coaching? I said I did this week.
Sit with that for a second, because that is not a man selling you anything. That's the president of the Boston Celtics admitting he'd rather have traded Jaylen Brown out west, that he doesn't know if his team is better, that he isn't sure if it was the right call, and that he owns a couple of number 7 jerseys because he bought them for his own kids. The spreadsheet read is real. The evidence is real. But whoever ran that model, it wasn't the actual guy who had to lose sleep over the results. It was the executives upstairs who don't have to face the music, which might be the most damning version of all. Maybe, but go all the way back to the first thing you heard this video. Tatum doesn't want to be here, period. He's done with him. That was the theory the night it broke, and it was everywhere. 5 days later, Stevens answered it.
Hard, fast rule. I don't ask other guys about other guys, because it's not, I don't want to put them in that position, and so he had none.
None. Not that Tatum wanted it. Not that he didn't. Boston traded the second best player in franchise history over the last decade and never asked the best one what he thought about it. which sounds cold, right? Until you see the number. Over the past 4 seasons, when Jayson Tatum's usage climbed above a third, the Celtics go 76-9. A staggering 89% win rate. When it drops below that threshold, Boston is still elite, going 99-52 to win roughly 66% of their games. That's a 24% swing in winning, all right on a single decision of who gets the ball. And with Jaylen Brown gone, his 36.2% usage rate, a volume that trailed only Luka Doncic for the highest in the entire league, vanishes for him. Every single one of those possessions is now completely unclaimed, sitting squarely in front of a 28-year-old superstar who has spent his entire career learning how to share. Listen to how Stevens buried it. Was, past tense, in the same sentence as the future. Around Tatum, it's cleaner than people admit. Derek White, one of the best two-way guards alive, is still there. Peyton Pritchard, Robbins at the rim, Conley steadying the bench, and a Paul George who doesn't have to be a second star, which is the exact job he just failed at in Philadelphia. He can be a fourth option. But 2 things are still missing, and the first one is the whole season. A second creator. Boston traded 28.7 points a night for a man who gives Philadelphia 17.3. And can't stay on the floor. If Tatum's Achilles isn't right, there is nobody on that roster who makes a bucket appear when the shot clock is dying in May. And a wing they can trust in a playoff series, which is what that trade exception is for if they use it. And the superstar left holding the bag for all of it, he found out the exact same way you did.
If I'm being transparent, it's weird.
Yeah.
Right? I've been on the Celtics for 9 years, and he was my teammate every single one of those. You understand throughout, the course of a career that the NBA is a business, and people change teams and change coaches and front office, but it doesn't make it any easier. There's still a human element of it that you feel those emotions. The city feels those emotions.
Quote, it's weird. That's the review. 9 years of sharing a baseline, surviving the trade rumors, and winning a banner together, distilled down to a 2-word shrug on a red carpet. So what was that actually? The best case is the one Boston is quietly betting on. Tatum comes back from his Achilles as the same player, the ball is in his hands and nobody argues about it, and that 76-9 turns out to be a real thing instead of a coincidence. George holds up for 50 games as a fourth option. February comes and that exception turns into the connector this roster has been missing since Al Horford walked, and the whole thing looks like the front office in the league honest enough to admit that 2 stars who take turns will never be enough. The worst case is that they traded the last decade of Boston's basketball for a 36-year-old, a word, and $3 million. Because that's the number that won't go away. Not the picks, not Paul George. $3 million and 70% going in and 70% coming out. They told you the problem was 2 players eating up the entire cap. So they just removed one of them and left Jayson Tatum completely alone. And whether that's the smartest thing Brad Stevens ever did, or the day the Boston Celtics stopped being the Boston Celtics, we'll start finding out in October.